My name's Rian. I'm 23 winters old, and I live just outside the village of Haldenford near the forest's edge. Not quite a city lad, but close enough to the market square to hear the bell tower when the wind's right. I'm a tradesman, specifically a lanternsmith and mender of lightcraft. Not one of those bumblers who poke around with bent iron and half a guess. I apprenticed under Master Dunrick for 5 hard years, earned my sigil mark, and took up steady work with the Guild of Tenders. We weren't nobles or big city masters, but we got by. On most days, I'd ride out to 2 or 3 steadings, mending lanterns, tuning flame jars, fixing shutter chains, just enough to keep meat in the larder coin in the pouch and hope alive for someday starting my own forge. That morning, nothing of note. I had 2 calls lined up. First was a small parchment house near the river, just a wall lantern with a dead runestone. Easy. Then the guild runner brought word of a second request. A noblewoman outside the village needed someone to look at her carriage house lamps. Said they flickered out without warning. Wasn't urgent, but she wanted it seen to that very day. I took the missive loaded up my pack and set off on foot with my tools strapped tight. Her estate sat along a quiet road past the eastern orchards, all stone-walled lanes and whispering trees. When I arrived, I had to stop for a moment just to look. Her manor wasn't like the thatched homes I usually worked. It was sleek, sharp, all dark timber and pale stone, with a wide gravel drive and a wrought iron gate already standing open as though it had been expecting me. The place reeked of coin. Old coin. I tightened my satchel, steadied my breath, and walked on. Just as I neared the carriage house, the side door opened. Out stepped a woman tall, maybe late 20s, early 30s, by my guess hair, dark as crow's wing and tied back in a loose braid. She wore riding trousers and a simple linen blouse. Nothing adorned, but it fit her well. Still, it wasn't just how she looked. It was the way she carried herself. Calm, like she was never rushed, never cornered. She glanced at me, barely lifting her eyes from the small parchment scroll she was reading. "You're here for the lamps." Her tone was flat, direct. "Aye," I said, nodding. "Ryan of the Tenders Guild, you mentioned flickering." She motioned toward the carriage house without looking up. "They go dark whenever I open the doors. Sometimes they come back, sometimes not. It's vexing." "I'll have a look," I said. She didn't say anything else, just turned and disappeared through the manor's side entrance. I dropped my satchel near the wall and got to work. Didn't take long to see the issue. The binding around the rune thread was brittle frayed like old rope. Looked like some shoddy craftsman had rushed the enchantment. I snuffed the flame glyphs, unthreaded the copper etchings, cleared the soot, and fitted in a fresh runestone and bracket. Took me the better part of 2 hours, maybe more with the calibrations. The whole time, not a peep from her. No hovering, no idle talk, just silence. When I was done, I packed up, reignited the glyphs, and tested the fixtures. The lamps lit true and held steady. I knocked on the side door and waited. A few heartbeats later, she returned, this time without the scroll. She walked right up, gave the lamps a quick glance as they glowed, and then allowed the faintest of smiles. "Well?" At last, she said, "They work properly." "Aye," I said. "Wiring was all wrong. Swapped the runestone, cleaned the housing. You should be fine now." She folded her arms and tilted her head, studying me. "You're good at what you do." "Thanks," I said, meaning it. Then she dropped something on me I didn't see coming. "You know," she said, "you're rather handsome." I blinked. Didn't know what to say. Let out a short, awkward chuckle. Thanks." Her smile softened just a little. And this time, it felt real, not mocking. Like she meant it. She leaned against the doorframe, arms still crossed. "So, Ryan, what do you do when you're not mending lamps and runestones?" That question caught me off guard. Truthfully, not much. Work keeps me busy. I'm more of a quiet fireplace kind of lad. Don't go out unless I have to. She nodded like that answer made sense. "That's refreshing," she said. "I'm not one for crowded feasts either, and that really threw me." She didn't look like someone who spent her nights alone. She looked like someone born to silk halls and ballroom lanterns. But the way she said it, it sounded honest. Folks see a certain image, she continued, and they think they know the whole story. "It gets old." I nodded slowly, not sure what to say to that. Then she added, "This might be strange, but would you want to walk with me this Sabbath? Somewhere quiet, somewhere real, I froze for just a breath. Walk with you, I asked. She smiled again, a bit more playful this time. Yes, you and me. No ball, no crowd, just space to breathe. You don't have to answer now, she said. I hesitated, then nodded. I'd like that. Her smile widened just a bit more. Good, she said. I'll send a rider with the details. Then just like that, she turned and vanished through the side door, gone like a candle snuffed. Left me standing there, tools in hand, staring at a door that may as well have led into another world. I shouldered my pack, stepped away from the manor, and made my way down the gravel path back toward the village road. When I reached the edge of the tree line, I just stood there a moment staring at the leaves and sky, wondering what in all the saints' names had just happened. The rest of that day passed like fog, like I was walking through someone else's dream. I made it to my second job, a small smithy near the mill, patched up a busted flame conduit on their forge, exchanged a few polite words with the master there. Smiled when expected, nodded on cue. But every few minutes, my hand drifted toward my belt pouch, where her note should have been. There was nothing, of course. No scroll, no falcon's feather, not even a wax seal stamped with her house crest. Nothing. I didn't even know her name. The job had gone exactly like any other clean, efficient, no-nonsense. I hadn't asked her a single personal question. I hadn't flirted. I hadn't even stayed long enough to drink water. And then, right at the end, she said those words. Asked if I'd walk with her, as if we'd known each other longer than the flicker of a lamp. And I said yes, like a bloody fool. By the time the week waned and Freya's day came around, I'd nearly convinced myself she hadn't meant it, that it was some jest. Some bored noble's passing whim, a tale to pass around at her feast table. You'll never guess what I did, she'd laugh goblet in hand. I invited the tradesmen. I tried to let it go. Told myself not to build castles in the air. Folks say strange things all the time, but then just after the sun passed high on Freya's day, a stable boy rode into town on a black mare. He wore no livery, no colors, just travel leathers and a simple cloak. He asked for me by name. He handed me a scroll sealed in red wax. I cracked it open with shaking hands. Still up for tomorrow, I'll come fetch you at midday. Send word where to meet. No signature, just that same bold, sure script. I swallowed hard. Sent word back by the same boy. Told him to meet me just outside the north watchtower by the main road, neutral ground close enough to town, but not too close to home. He gave a curt nod, turned his horse, and vanished down the lane. That night I couldn't sleep. The next morning I woke far earlier than I needed. Tried on 3 tunics all nearly the same shade of brown. Picked the least wrinkled. Brushed down my boots till the leather caught the light. Even trimmed my beard, which I almost never did on a rest day. I don't know why. I just needed to show up looking decent. Still me. But me cleaned up. I got to the north tower well before the hour, sat on the old stone wall pretending to whittle a stick, but really I just watched the road. Every hoofbeat, every creak of cart wheels, I turned my head. Then I heard it. A low thunder of hooves, not a draft horse, not a wagon. This was something sleek, fast. She came into view astride a snow-white destrier cloak, billowing behind her dark braid trailing like a banner. She wore a forest green riding coat and soft gloves. Sunlight flashed off a silver clasp at her throat. I swear every peasant on that road paused to look. And then her eyes landed on me. She gave a slight nod. Ryan. I rose to my feet, heart hammering like a blacksmith's anvil. That's me. Her smile tugged at one corner. Mount up. Behind her a second steed waited saddled and still. Without a word I climbed on. The ride out took us through winding hills and thickets of pine. We didn't talk much, just rode side by side as the woods thickened and the air cooled. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. Only birdsong and the rhythm of hooves. Finally, after what felt like nearly an hour, she veered down a narrow trail that led into a shaded glen. I could hear water gentle at first, then louder as we rode on. We tied the horses near an old cedar tree and walked the last bit on foot. The trees opened around us like a curtain parting. Before us was a pool of clear water fed by a small waterfall tucked between mossy rocks and tall grass. The sun dappled through the leaves overhead, painting the surface in flickers of gold. It stopped me cold. It was still, peaceful. the kind of place you didn't speak loudly in. She walked forward, slipping off her gloves, and sat on a wide, flat rock near the edge of the water. She didn't smile, just let out a breath, long and quiet. "This place," she said, voice low, "it makes me feel small, but in a good way." I joined her boots thudding softly on the stone. She pulled off her riding boots and dipped her feet into the water. I did the same. It was icy, made my skin jolt, but it woke me up like nothing else. Still facing the pool, she spoke again. "I bet I know what you're thinking." I glanced sideways. "Do you?" She nodded. "You're wondering why someone like me would bring someone like you here." I didn't answer. She wasn't wrong. She kept her gaze on the ripples. "My father oversees the river-hold trade routes, massive operation, caravans, fleets, you name it. My mother handles personnel. They bought our manor outright when I was still learning my letters, tutors, formal dinners, everything polished." I said nothing. Let her talk. Most folk only see what's on the surface, she continued. The noblewoman, the estate, the polished smiles, they like the image, not the person. She drew a line across the water's surface with her toe. Men chase what I represent, not who I am. She paused. Quiet settled like a blanket. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't. "Other girls either wanted to be me," she said quietly, "or they hated my guts." She paused. Her voice dropped lower, almost like she was saying something she wasn't used to saying aloud. I never felt like anyone actually saw me. She kept her eyes on the water, the light of the falls dancing across her face. Not for real. Not until I met someone who didn't even ask for my name. "You mean—" "Me?" I asked carefully. She nodded once, still calm, still steady. "You didn't ask about my family. Didn't try to flatter or pretend. You just did the work. Said thanks, then left." She looked at the pool again, not at me. "That's rare. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just said the only thing that felt true. I kind of figured you were playing a joke on me," I admitted. "Just having a bit of fun at the help's expense." She finally turned to look at me, eyes softer than they'd been since I met her. "I get that," she said, "but I wasn't." We sat in that silence for a while, but it didn't feel strange. It felt like something necessary, like the stillness after a bell stops ringing. Then she gave me the smallest smile. "Barely there, but enough to shift the whole air between us. I'm not asking for anything heavy," she said. "I just wanted to talk to someone who doesn't want anything from me." "You got it," I said. "No strings." She nodded again. "Thanks." And somehow that was enough to keep us there for over an hour, talking, laughing, telling ridiculous stories from our childhoods. I told her about a time I nearly burned down the village bakery trying to fix a broken chimney flue. She told me about sneaking out of a noble dinner to ride bareback in the rain. We just talked. It was the calmest I'd felt in a long while, like something inside me had finally taken a full breath for the first time in years. Eventually the sun began sinking behind the tree line, and she stood brushing twigs and gravel from her trousers. "We should head back," she said. "Yeah," I replied, standing up. "But I'm really glad you brought me here." The ride back was quiet, but not empty. It was the good kind of quiet, the kind that hums between two people who don't feel the need to fill every second with words. She dropped me off just outside the north watchtower, same place she'd picked me up. I slid off the horse, adjusted the strap on my satchel, then turned to her. "Think I'll see you again?" I asked. She didn't answer right away, just looked at me with that smirk again, the one that said she knew something I didn't. "Maybe," she said, "if you send a falcon." I laughed a little. "All right, I'll find a good one." She gave a nod light on the reins and then turned the horse around. I stood there watching her ride off until the trees swallowed her whole. And that's when it hit me. Whatever that had been, it hadn't just been a ride or a chat by a stream. It wasn't a courtship, not exactly, but it was something. A beginning. I just didn't know of what. The days that followed felt different. I was still doing my rounds, still fixing broken sconces and flame wards and lighting rods, but it didn't feel like a routine anymore. Not quite. She'd carved out a space in my head, quiet and steady like the memory of a tune you can't shake. She stayed there. constant. But what threw me was the silence that followed. No scrolls, no riders, not even a folded note slipped under my door. I wasn't expecting anything big, but after how real she'd been out there in the wild, I figured something. A line, a feather, a joke, anything, but nothing came. And with it came the doubt. Maybe she just needed someone to talk to that day. A warm body beside her on a cold bench. Maybe I was just the closest safe stranger, a tradesman from another world. But I kept thinking about the way she looked at me before I climbed off that horse, or the way she'd said, maybe if you send a falcon, like she was handing me the reins and walking away. So I did. I sent word, wrote her a short note by candlelight the following Friday, sealed it and sent it by a messenger hawk the guild sometimes used for quick notices. Didn't even expect her to reply. But by dusk the hawk returned. Inside was a fresh scrap of parchment, her familiar hand scrawled across the page. I was hoping you'd send one. Want to meet again? This time you pick. I exhaled slow like I'd been holding the breath for days. This time I'll plan something, I wrote back. She didn't ask what, just returned a single word. Ready. I had no idea what someone like her expected from a second meeting, but I knew what I wanted. Something honest, something simple, something real. So I planned a picnic, a real one. I borrowed a thick wool blanket from my mother, packed salted bread, cured meat, and slices of dried apple, filled 2 glass bottles with fresh lemon water from the apothecary's stand, and wrapped them in cloth to stay cool. Even borrowed a small satchel box from the tanner just to carry it all clean. Didn't want to impress her, just wanted it to matter. When the morning of our meeting came, I borrowed a horse, not some flashy war steed with braids and barding, just a clean, sturdy bay gelding from the guild stables. Well-fed, well-tempered. Something simple, dependable. I brushed him down myself, checked his hooves twice, and set off just after second bell. Her manner looked the same as before. Still quiet, still carved out of old stone and wealth. But this time she was already waiting out front, seated on the steps like she'd been there a while. She wasn't dressed like a lady, no gown, no jewelry. Just a pale blue riding cloak over a plain tunic and leggings. No paint on her face, no guards at her back, no sign of titles. She looked real. She rose with a smile and walked over, pulling the hood down from her head. Greetings, picnic boy. I laughed under my breath. Ready for a surprise always, she said, and swung up onto the second horse I'd brought along without hesitation. We rode for about half an hour past the market lanes and into the outer meadows where the trees began to stretch tall and wide. It was the kind of place my father used to bring me before he passed a clearing that looked over the low hills where the sky opened up so wide it made your chest feel small. There, under a row of old oaks, I dismounted. We laid the blanket out in the grass. The air smelled like wild mint and sun-warmed hay. I uncorked the lemon drink and poured it into 2 small tin cups. She sat cross-legged, staring up at the drifting clouds like they were telling her something. I can't remember the last time I did anything like this, she said. What a picnic. She gave a quiet laugh, shaking her head. No, something unpolished, not posed or arranged for how it'll look. Just this. She looked around as if to confirm it was real. This feels like something that actually matters. We talked, ate bread and fruit and dried meat. I told her how terrible I was at catching fish. She told me about the time she snuck a bottle of her father's mead into a noble's wedding and passed it off as imported. We laughed like fools. There was no pressure, no hidden meanings. She wasn't trying to impress me, and I wasn't trying to earn her favor. We were just there, in that moment. Then, after a quiet stretch, I looked over. She was watching the tree's sunlight brushing across her cheek in just the right way. Then she turned toward me slow and thoughtful. You know what I liked most the other day, she asked. What you didn't look at me like I was a prize. I didn't speak. Not a title, not a name, not something to be chased or collected. You just looked at me. I felt my throat tighten. Didn't quite know what to say. Then she leaned forward, just a little, and I met her halfway. The kiss was gentle, unhurried, nothing dramatic, just honest. That kiss felt like an understanding we hadn't spoken aloud yet, like 2 pages lining up for the first time. When we finally eased apart, she smiled softly and said, I was hoping you'd do that. I gave a sheepish shrug. Wasn't sure I had it in me. "You're kind of intimidating," I added. She laughed. "Good. Keeps the wolves at bay." We stayed there a while longer, lying side by side on the blanket, letting the breeze carry leaves over us like falling whispers. She reached for my hand as the sky turned gold. "I don't know what this is," she said quietly, "but I like it." "Same," I said. The ride back was calm. We didn't speak much. Didn't need to. There was something in the air between us that felt settled, like the sound of distant bells carried on a wind you trust. When we reached her manor, she didn't stop at the gate. We rode all the way up to the steps. Before she dismounted, she turned to me. "Send word," she said. "Anytime." Then she slipped down from the saddle, gave me one last look, and disappeared inside. I sat there for a moment longer still, breathing in the scent of lemon balm and lavender that clung to her cloak. I didn't know where this was heading, but I knew it wasn't nothing. It mattered now. The next few days carried a strange lightness, like I'd finally set down a weight I didn't realize I'd been holding. Work was still work, fixing sconces, mending lantern wards, unclogging smoke vents, but it felt different, less like routine, more like momentum. I started writing to her more often, short notes delivered by crow or hawk. Nothing grand, just little slices of life. Fixed a ceiling torch one-handed while holding a hammer in my teeth. Modest heroics achieved, she sent one back spilled ink all over my mother's ledger during a council meeting. May have started a war. Top that. We traded messages, stories, little hand-sketched drawings. It felt like passing notes through a shared world no one else saw. No pressure, no titles, just two people who kept finding new corners of each other, but still a part of me wasn't sure where I stood. She was noble-born, sharp, commanding. I was just a tradesman, boots worn thin, hands calloused. I couldn't help but wonder how long her world would allow mine to stay in it. Then a week after that picnic, a courier arrived late one evening. Tired horse, sealed scroll. The note read, "Are you free tomorrow night? My parents are away. I want to show you something." It was the first time she invited me inside, not just to the estate, inside her world. I stared at the parchment for a long time before writing back. Me, I'll be there. That evening I arrived just before sunset, wearing my cleanest wool tunic, dark, freshly brushed, with a belt that hadn't seen mud in days. The sky was glowing soft gold as I tied off my horse beside the stone post. The front door to her manor stood ajar, warm light spilling through. She was there, standing barefoot in the entryway. No cloak, no rings, her hair twisted into a loose bun like she'd done it without a mirror. She wore a thick, oversized hearthrobe that hung off one shoulder and simple leggings tied at the waist. No paints on her cheeks, no jewelry in sight. She looked peaceful. "Evening," she said with a quiet smile, stepping aside. "Come in." I stepped into the foyer boots, leaving faint prints on the polished stone. For a moment I just looked around. The manor was beautiful arched ceilings, wide windows with panes of pale glass, tall wooden beams overhead. But it wasn't cold like some noble homes I'd worked in. It didn't feel like something curated. It felt lived in, like someone had taken roots and grown gently around it. It felt like hers. She led me through the hall into the kitchen. 2 plates already rested on the counter beside a tall candelabra wax, dripping like it didn't mind. Flame light flickered across the wood and stone. "You cooked?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. She smirked. "Of course not. I had it brought in and reheated it in the hearth. I'm what you'd call semi-domestic. We took our food out to the garden patio. Small lanterns hung from strings above us, gently swaying in the breeze. The air had that sharp bite that came when summer was starting to slip away into autumn. She tossed me a cloak from the chair beside her. Said it belonged to an ex, she added. Figured it deserved a better ending. I didn't ask. Just slipped it on. We talked like we had during the picnic, nothing polished, just real. She told me about her work and trade correspondence for a merchant guild helping rebrand sustainable woodcraft and low-smoke fuel for the upper districts. I told her about my dream of starting a workshop, one where I could teach lads who didn't want to live their whole lives in fields or fighting pits. At one point, she stood and looked at me. "Come on," she said. "I want to show you something." I followed her through a spiral stairwell and down a long corridor until she stopped at the very last door. She opened it, and I stopped in place. It was an art room. Canvases leaned against the walls, some unfinished, others bursting with bold, messy color. The scent of paint and charcoal clung to the air. Papers were scattered, brushes left unwashed smudges across the floor. But it wasn't chaos. It was soul. "You paint?" I asked, surprised. She nodded. "Not for display, just for me." I stepped in slowly, took it in. Brush strokes that screamed, others that whispered, layers of feeling left unspoken. She stood behind me, voice soft. "This is the only room where I feel like myself. No makeup, no manners, no one expecting anything." I turned to her. "You should feel like that all the time." For a second she looked right at me, and for the first time I saw the crack in the shell she wore around the world. She stepped a little closer. "I don't know what this is between us, Ryan," she said barely above a whisper. "But when I'm with you, I don't feel like I'm acting, and that means more than I can explain." I nodded. "I don't know either, but I think about you all the time." We stood there surrounded by her truth. Her unspoken confession spilled onto canvas, dripping off the edges of her hidden self. And for once, I didn't feel like an outsider. I kissed her again. But this time, it was different. No questions hanging in the space between us, no hesitation, just trust. Later that night, we ended up curled on her couch beside the hearth. Some old lute song hummed softly from a player's stone nearby, barely noticed, our legs tangled under the blanket. She rested her head on my shoulder. "You're the first person I've let in like this in a long time," she said. I looked at her. "I'm not going anywhere." She gave me a small, quiet smile, almost sad. "Don't say that unless you mean it." "I do," I whispered. "And I meant it." We drifted off there, the two of us wrapped in quiet and warmth. I woke sometime near midnight, the soft patter of rain on the glass windows above the hearth just barely reaching my ears. She was still there, breathing soft, one hand resting on my chest like she'd claimed that space and wasn't planning to give it back. I didn't move, didn't want to shatter the quiet, didn't want to leave whatever this moment was. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Whether her world might one day push mine aside, whether the walls of her name, her bloodline, her status might be too thick for me to ever climb through. But I knew this. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a tradesman showing up to fix a broken lamp. I felt seen. It's been about 4 moons now since that day I first knocked on Lady Angela's carriage door. I remember the look she gave me, barely a glance, her tone clipped and businesslike. Just another task, another line on her parchment. And I was. For a few hours, that's all I was supposed to be. But somewhere between rune threads and busted flame glyphs, something else caught fire. We kept seeing each other after that night. Not daily, we had separate lives, duties, obligations, but enough that it started to feel like something real, like rhythm, like a pattern we'd started weaving stitch by stitch. What began as quiet Sunday meetings turned into full weekends, hawk scrolls turned into late-night visits, and those early silences that once held awkwardness, now they held peace. We never had some grand conversation, no declarations, no "so what are we" moment. It just became, and maybe that's why it felt so genuine. But the world isn't made of only one layer. It didn't take long for me to realize that being close to someone like Lady Angela came with its own set of complications. At first it was subtle, just the way people looked at us when we rode into town together. Not in a cruel way, but in that manner of polite curiosity. The kind of stares that say he doesn't belong here, as if I'd wandered into a castle feast and accidentally sat down at the high table. One evening, she invited me to an engagement gathering at one of her noble friends' estates. The The kind of place with marble floors, harps playing in the corners, and guests speaking in riddles about trade charters and royal grants. Everyone was dressed in silks and tailored doublets. I wore my best tunic, the one without any tears or ash stains, and nursed a watered-down cider while counting the hours on the moon dial. That night I told her quietly that I'd felt out of place. She didn't hesitate, looked me straight in the eye and said, "That's exactly why I brought you, because you're not like them." And I believed her, I did, but it didn't always make things easier. It wasn't just her world adjusting to mine, I had to shift too. My guildmaster noticed I wasn't as sharp. I started turning down extra repair commissions, not out of laziness, but because for the first time in my life, being with someone mattered more than doing something for coin. And for a man who'd always measured his worth by what he could fix by how hard he worked, that was unfamiliar ground, she noticed. One night, she came to my place, nothing noble about it, just a modest stone cottage with mismatched furniture and tools piled in corners. She sat cross-legged on the bench by the fire, flipping through an old apprentice ledger I didn't even realize I'd left out. "You've built a good life here," she said. "It's not much," I replied, "but it's mine." She looked around the room. The worn counter, the patched window, the crooked oil painting I'd traded for with 2 spare hinges and a busted lantern. "I like it," she said. And I believed her. That night we talked, not in dreams and fantasy, but in real words. Solid ones, about what we were building, where we were headed. She told me she'd been thinking about stepping away from her trade court role, said she was tired of smiling at numbers and pretending to care about parchment scrolls filled with profit lines. She wanted something smaller, something with meaning. Maybe something creative, she added, her voice soft. I told her I'd been thinking the same, starting my own workshop, hiring a few young lads, teaching them what I knew, putting my name on the sign above the door. Not just working for someone else's dream, but building something that was mine. Then she looked at me and said something I never expected. "What if we built something together?" I blinked. "You mean, like us?" She nodded. "Yes. Like us. That was 2 moons ago." Since then, things have shifted, and in the best ways. She's been helping me build something real, helped design a sign, came up with a name I actually liked, sketched out a simple logo for my shop seal, and even drew up a trade plan that somehow made sense to a guy who still counts coins by candlelight. I'm still out there every day patching roof lamps, repairing sigil locks, brushing soot off my shoulders. But it no longer feels like I'm just fixing things. It feels like I'm laying stone for something that could last. We're not rushing into anything. We still live in our own spaces, still wake up to our own habits, still bump into our own flaws. But we choose each other deliberately, day after day, and that choosing, that quiet, steady yes, it means more than any grand label ever could. Last week, we returned to the waterfall, same trail, same pool, same great rocks, but this time, we brought spiced coffee and honey cakes. I had my arm around her and she leaned against my shoulder. Neither of us said much. We just listened to the rhythm of the water, to the kind of silence that says more than words ever could. Then she said, "I never thought I'd fall for the tradesman who came to fix my lanterns," I laughed. "I never thought the lady of the manor would ask me to stay." She looked up at me, smile warm. "Well, you're more than just a lanternsmith now." I didn't say anything back, just kissed her temple and held her a little tighter, because she was right. I'm still Ryan, still 24, still figuring it out, one task, one scar, one sunrise at a time. But now, I've got someone beside me, someone who doesn't just see what I do. She sees me. And maybe that's the real tale here. Not some fantasy about a noble lady and a common-born man. Not about horses or stolen glances or kisses by moonlight. It's about 2 people from 2 very different worlds choosing to build something new. Together. No drama, no crowds cheering, no crowns or prophecies, just something honest, something a little messy, imperfect, real, and somehow ours.